Chapter 2. The Witnesses. The coastal villages near Arecibo baked under the June sun of 1976, their dirt roads shimmering with heat that rose in waves, distorting the horizon where the jungle met the sea. Elias Marrow drove his rattling VW van through the outskirts, the engine coughing like a sick man, its shocks creaking under the weight of his obsession. Star charts, notebooks, and the reel-to-reel tape that had become his tether to something he couldn't name. The air was thick with salt and the sweet rot of overripe mangoes, the kind of humidity that clung to the skin, turning every breath into a labor. He'd been in Puerto Rico 6 months, chasing whispers of UFOs, but the tape he'd found in Arecibo's secondhand shop. A recording from 1969, labeled Arecibo, July 20th, 69 M. Rivera had shifted his hunt from the sky to the sea, to the trench 20 miles offshore, a chasm the locals called cursed. The tape's chant, a wet, guttural pulse that wasn't human, played in his mind even now, its rhythm a hook in his chest, pulling him toward answers he wasn't sure he wanted. Elias parked outside a cantina in the village of La Perla, a cluster of weathered shacks and pastel houses perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The cantina, El Ancla, was a squat building with a tin roof rusted to a mottled red, its walls peeling paint that might have once been blue. Salsa music drifted from a jukebox inside, mingling with the crash of waves and the cackle of gulls fighting over fish scraps. Locals lounged on the porch, men in straw hats and women with braided hair, their eyes tracking Elias as he stepped from the van, his boots crunching on gravel. He was a stranger here, the gringo with the wild beard and haunted eyes, the one who asked too many questions about lights in the sky and things in the sea. His faded denim shirt was damp with sweat, his jeans stiff with dust from days on the road, and the weight of the tape, tucked in a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, felt heavier than it should, like it carried the trench's own gravity. Inside, El Ancla was dim, the air thick with cigarette smoke, spilled rum, and the faint fishy tang of the ocean that seeped into everything. Ceiling fans spun lazily, their blades wobbling, casting shadows that danced across walls adorned with faded photos of fishing boats and a cracked Virgin Mary statue in the corner, her eyes seeming to follow Elias as he approached the bar. The bartender, a stocky man with a scar across his cheek, polished a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the counter. Elias ordered a medalla, the beer's cold bite a brief relief from the heat, and scanned the room. Fishermen hunched over tables, their hands calloused from nets, their faces carved with lines from years of squinting into the sun. A group of younger men played dominoes, their laughter sharp, while a lone woman in a red dress nursed a drink, her gaze distant, lost in thoughts the rum couldn't drown. Elias had come to La Perla because of the stories, the ones Rosa Delgado had hinted at in her bar, La Luna, tales of El Luz del Abismo, the light of the abyss, that fishermen swore they'd seen, lights that weren't stars, weren't ships, but something older, something that watched. He'd spent the past week driving from village to village, interviewing anyone who'd talk, piecing together a mosaic of fear and wonder. Most dismissed him as a crank, their smiles pitying, but a few, old men with trembling hands, women who crossed themselves mid-sentence, spoke of the trench with a dread that felt alive, a weight that matched the chant on Miguel's tape. Today, he was here for Don Pepe, a fisherman Rosa had mentioned, a man who'd sailed the waters off Arecibo for 50 years and seen things he didn't speak of lightly. Elias spotted him in a corner booth, alone, a bottle of rum and a single glass his only companions. Don Pepe was 70, maybe older, his face a map of wrinkles, his eyes cloudy but sharp, like sea glass polished by time. His hands, gnarled as driftwood, clutched a cigarette, its smoke curling upward, a ghost in the dim light. His straw hat sat crooked, casting a shadow across a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days. Elias approached, his boots scuffing the wooden floor, and slid into the booth uninvited, setting his beer down with a soft clink. "You Don Pepe?" Elias asked, keeping his voice low, respectful, though his pulse thrummed with anticipation. "Rosa Delgado said you might talk to me. About the sea, the lights." Don Pepe didn't look up, exhaling smoke through his nose, the cigarette's ember flaring. "Rosa talks too much," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp, thick with the island's accent. "What's a gringo like you want with old stories? You one of those reporters, looking for a laugh?" "No reporter," Elias said, leaning forward, elbows on the table, the wood sticky under his skin. "I'm a scientist. Was anyway. I study signals, things the observatory picks up. Heard you've seen stuff out there, near the trench." Things that aren't in any book. Pepe's eyes flicked up, meeting Elias's, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged, like the pause before thunder. The trench, he said, the word heavy, like a stone dropped into deep water. You don't study the trench, hombre. You stay away, unless you want it to study you. He took a swig of rum, the glass trembling slightly, and set it down hard, the sound sharp in the cantina's hum. Elias pulled out his notebook, its pages warped from humidity, and a pencil worn to a stub. I'm not here to waste your time, he said, his voice steady despite the itch in his fingers to write, to capture every word. Tell me what you saw. The Luz del Abismo. Please. Pepe stared at him, long and hard, then leaned back, his chair creaking. You don't believe in God, do you? He asked, his tone not accusing but curious, like he was measuring Elias's soul. Don't matter. What's out there don't care about God or man. He tapped ash from his cigarette, the gray flecks scattering on the table, and began to speak, his voice low, deliberate, each word a stone laid in a wall of memory. Was 62 before the dish was even built, Pepe said, his eyes drifting to the window, where the sea glinted beyond the cliff. I was young, strong, thought I owned the ocean. Took my boat, La Serena, out past the reef, chasing snapper. Water was calm, sky clear, but the air felt wrong. Heavy, like it was pressing down. My nets went deep, deeper than I meant, into the trench's edge. When I pulled them up, they were shredded, not cut, not torn, shredded, like something chewed them. Fibers all frayed, wet with this slime, black and sticky, smelled like death, not fish. I thought it was sharks, maybe, but sharks don't do that. Sharks don't leave marks like claws, don't make the water hum. Elias scribbled, his pencil scratching, his heart racing. Hum. Like a sound. Pepe nodded, slow, his eyes distant. Like a pulse, deep in your bones. Felt it in my chest, my teeth. Then I saw it, a light green, not like any star or flare. Came up from the water, slow, spinning like a wheel. Hung there, just above the waves, and I swear it was watching me. Didn't move, didn't blink, but it saw me, knew my name, my sins. I froze, couldn't breathe, couldn't pray. My crew, 3 men, they screamed. One pissed himself, another started praying, but the light didn't care. It sank back down, slow, into the trench, and the hum stopped. We hauled us back to shore, didn't fish for a month. Never went near the trench again. Elias's hand shook as he wrote, the words green light, spinning, watching filling the page. It matched the tape's chant, the visions it had sparked, Spiral's eyes, a presence that knew. You said it was alive, he pressed, his voice tight. What did you mean? Pepe's jaw tightened, his cigarette burning to a stub. Not alive like you or me. Alive like the sea itself, like something that don't die, don't sleep, just waits. I seen it twice more, over the years, always near the trench. Always the same light, same hum. Last time, 74, my nephew was with me. He looked too long, said he heard it singing, like voices not human. He ain't been right since, talks to himself, draws spirals in the dirt. You want to know what's out there, gringo? It's not a ship, not a machine. It's something that sees you and don't let go. Elias swallowed, his throat dry despite the beer. Anyone else see it? Anyone talk about it? Pepe snorted, pouring more rum. Plenty talk, but most don't sail there no more. Ask the kids, though. They sneak out to the cliffs, smoke, drink, dare each other to look at the sea. One boy, Javier, he's been running his mouth lately, says he saw something last month, a disc rising from the water, lights that sang. People think he's loco, but I seen his eyes. Same as my nephew's. Same as mine after 62. Elias scribbled Javier, disc, singing lights, his mind racing. The tape, Pepe's story, now this boy, pieces of a puzzle, each one pointing to the trench, to the Luz del Abismo. He wanted to ask more, to pry open every detail, but Pepe's face had closed, his eyes hard, like he'd said too much. Thanks, Elias said, sliding a crumpled dollar across the table for the rum. If you remember anything else. Don't come back. Pepe cut him off, his voice low, final. You chase that light, it chases you. And it don't lose. He drained his glass, turned to the window, and didn't look at Elias again. Elias stepped outside, the sun lower now, painting the sea gold and red, a beauty that felt like a lie. He climbed into the van, the tape in its bag a burning weight on the passenger seat. Javier was his next stop, a teenager who might be crazy or might have seen the truth. The chant from the tape echoed in his head, not a sound but a feeling, a pull toward the trench that grew stronger with every story, every warning. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a question, and drove toward the cliffs where the kids hung out. The seas whisper louder now, calling him to the abyss. Elias Marrow's van rattled along the coastal road, the late afternoon sun of June 1976 casting long shadows across the dirt path that wound through the outskirts of Arecibo. The air was heavy with salt and the acrid sting of diesel, the jungle's green wall pressing close, its palms swaying in a breeze that did little to ease the oppressive heat. The reel-to-reel tape, labeled Arecibo, July 20th, 69 m. Rivera sat on the passenger seat, its yellowed case a silent accusation, its chant a wet, guttural pulse that wasn't human, still echoing in Elias's mind, a hook sunk deep in his chest. He'd spent the morning with Don Pepe, the old fisherman whose tales of shredded nets and a green light that watched had only sharpened his hunger for answers. Now he was chasing another lead, Javier, the teenager who'd claimed to see a disc rise from the sea, its lights singing. But first, he needed Rosa Delgado's help to find her cousin Miguel, the man who'd recorded the tape, the man who'd heard something in '69 that broke him. Elias gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the van's engine coughing as if it shared his exhaustion, his obsession. He pulled into the gravel lot of La Luna Bar, a weathered dive perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, its neon sign flickering even in daylight, the L dark, making it red La Una. The bar's walls were sun-bleached, streaked with salt spray, and its tin roof sagged under the weight of years and storms. Salsa music spilled from the open door, clashing with the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks below, a sound that carried the trench's invisible weight, 20 miles out, a chasm that haunted every story Elias had chased. He stepped from the van, boots crunching on gravel, his denim shirt damp with sweat, the canvas bag with the tape slung over his shoulder. His beard itched, his eyes burned from too many cigarettes and too little sleep, but the tape's chant drove him forward, a pulse that matched his heartbeat, whispering of truths he was close to grasping. Inside, La Luna was a haze of smoke and dim light, the air thick with the sour tang of spilled rum, fried plantains, and the faint musk of sweat-soaked bodies. Ceiling fans spun, their blades wobbling, casting jagged shadows across walls plastered with faded posters of boxing matches and beer ads. The jukebox blared a salsa tune, its rhythm infectious but jarring against the low murmur of fishermen, dock workers, and women in bright dresses who laughed too loud to mask their weariness. Rosa stood behind the bar, pouring a shot of rum for a regular, her braids swinging as she moved, her apron stained with grease and beer, the La Luna logo barely legible. Her dark eyes flicked up as Elias approached, narrowing with a mix of recognition and reluctance, like she'd hoped he wouldn't come back. "Rosa," Elias said, sliding onto a stool, his voice rough, scraped raw by nicotine and sleepless nights. He set the canvas bag on the bar, the tape inside a hidden weight that seemed to hum, though he knew it was silent. "Need your help. Gotta find Miguel." Rosa's hands stilled, the rum bottle hovering over the glass, her expression hardening. "You don't listen, do you?" she said, her accent thick, her tone sharp but undercut with worry. "Told you Miguel's a mess. He don't want to talk, especially not to some gringo chasing ghosts." She poured the shot, slid it to the regular, a grizzled man with a missing tooth who muttered thanks, and wiped her hands on her apron, her movements brisk, like she could scrub away the conversation. "I'm not chasing ghosts," Elias said, leaning forward, his elbows on the sticky bar, his eyes locked on hers. "I've got his tape, Rosa. From '69, the night he quit. It's real. Something's on it. Something not human. I need to know what he heard, what he saw. He's the only one who can tell me what I'm dealing with." His voice was steady, but his fingers twitched, itching for a cigarette, for the notebook in his bag, for anything to anchor him against the chant that played in his head, relentless, pulling him toward the trench. Rosa crossed her arms, her braid catching the light from a flickering bulb above. "You think you're the first to come poking around, looking for answers?" she said, her voice low, meant for him alone. "People been talking about the Luz del Abismo since I was a kid, fishermen, priests, even cops. They all end up the same, scared, broken, or gone. Miguel was my cousin, my family, and that night took him from us. You want to dig that up, you're digging his grave." Her eyes held his, fierce but pleading, a warning wrapped in care. Elias pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a match that flared too bright in the dim bar, the smoke curling like a ghost. "I'm not digging graves," he said, exhaling, the words tasting like ash. "I'm digging for truth. The tape's got a signal, Rosa, a pulse, a chant. It's tied to the trench, to the lights Don Pepe saw, to what Javier's claiming. Miguel heard it first. He knows something, and I'm not leaving till I talk to him. His voice was firm, but his hand shook, betraying the desperation that gnawed at him. The need to prove he wasn't crazy, that his life's ruin wasn't for nothing. Rosa sighed, her shoulders sagging, and glanced at the bar's clock, its hands ticking past 4. "You're a stubborn bastard," she muttered, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's in San Juan, a dive called El Faro near the docks. But he ain't the Miguel I grew up with. Whatever he heard, it's eating him alive. You push him, he might break, or you might." She straightened, her eyes hard again. "And don't tell him I sent you. I got enough ghosts without adding his." Elias nodded, stubbing out his cigarette in a chipped ashtray, the ember hissing. "Thanks," he said, sliding off the stool, grabbing the bag. "I owe you." "You owe me nothing," Rosa shot back, turning to pour another drink, her braids swinging like a rebuke. "Just don't come back crying when the sea takes you." The drive to San Juan was 2 hours, the van's headlights cutting through the dusk, the jungle giving way to concrete and neon as the city loomed. Elias's hands gripped the wheel, his mind churning with Pepe's story, the tape's chant, Rosa's warning. San Juan's docks were a maze of warehouses and bars, the air thick with oil, fish, and the tang of cheap rum. El Faro was a hole in the wall, its sign a faded lighthouse, its windows grimy, letting out a sickly yellow light. Elias parked, the van's engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped into the bar, the tape in his bag a burning weight, a key he was afraid to turn. Inside, El Faro was a haze of smoke and despair, the kind of place where dreams went to die. The bar was scarred wood, the stools wobbly, the air heavy with the stench of stale beer and vomit. A jukebox played a mournful bolero, its notes drowned by the slurred arguments of dock workers and the clink of glasses. Miguel Rivera sat at the far end, alone, a bottle of rum and a chipped glass his only company. He was 40 but looked older, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken, their whites yellowed, his hair thinning and gray. His hands, once steady enough to work Arecibo's consoles, trembled as he poured, spilling rum on the bar, his shirt stained with sweat and liquor. Elias approached, his boots sticking to the floor, and slid onto the stool beside him. "Miguel Rivera?" he asked, keeping his voice low, the bag with the tape on his lap, its weight pressing against his thigh. Miguel's eyes flicked up, bloodshot and wary, like a cornered animal's. "Who's asking?" he slurred, his voice a rasp, thick with rum and regret. "Don't know you. Don't want to." "Name's Elias," he said, pulling out a cigarette, lighting it to steady his nerves. "I'm a scientist, used to work with signals, like you did at Arecibo. I found your tape, from '69, the one you recorded the night you quit." He paused, watching Miguel's face, seeing the flinch, the way his hand tightened around the glass. "I heard it, Miguel. The chant, the pulse. I need to know what you know." Miguel's laugh was a bitter bark, raw and broken. "You heard it, huh?" he said, his eyes darting to the bag, then away, like it burned to look. "You're already dead, you just don't know it." He drained his glass, poured another, the rum splashing. "Get out. Burn that tape. Forget you ever heard it." Elias leaned closer, the smoke from his cigarette curling between them. "I can't," he said, his voice low, urgent. "It's real, Miguel. The signal, the trench, the lights, they're connected. Don Pepe told me about the Luz del Abismo. A kid named Javier saw a disc. Your tape's the key. Tell me what happened that night." Miguel's hand shook, the glass clinking against the bar, his eyes wild, haunted. "You think you want answers?" he hissed, leaning in, his breath sour with rum. "That night, I was alone at the dish, moon landing on every screen, world cheering. Then I heard it, 430 megahertz, no known band. A pulse like a heart, but wrong, too slow. Then the chant, voices, not human, like they were drowning, calling me. I recorded it, thought I'd be famous, thought I'd crack the sky open. But it wasn't a signal, wasn't a ship." His voice dropped, a whisper that chilled Elias's blood. "It's a god, gringo. Down in the trench, older than the sea, older than the stars. It sees you, knows you, puts eyes in your dreams. Eyes in the deep, watching, always watching." Elias's heart pounded, the chant from the tape echoing in his head, Pepe's story of a light that saw him now mirrored in Miguel's words. "What kind of god?" he asked, his voice barely audible, his hand clutching the bag, the tape's case warm through the canvas, impossibly so. Miguel laughed again, a sound like breaking glass. "The kind that don't care about us." I saw things after spirals, eyes, shapes that flew and crawled. Burned my logs, ran, but it's still in me, in my head, every night. You keep that tape, it'll take you too. He grabbed Elias's arm, his grip desperate, his eyes pleading. Destroy it, hombre. Before it's too late. Elias pulled free, his skin crawling, Miguel's words a weight he couldn't shake. I need to know, he said, standing, the bar's haze closing in. I'm sorry. He turned, leaving Miguel to his rum, the man's slurred curses fading as Elias stepped into the night, the tape of burning coal in his bag. The trenches call louder now, a siren song he couldn't resist. The sun was a dying ember over San Juan as Elias Mero drove his VW van back from El Faro, the dive bar where he'd confronted Miguel Rivera, the broken man whose 1969 tape had become Elias's obsession. It was June 1976, and the Puerto Rican night closed in, humid and heavy, the jungle's chorus of cicadas and frogs a relentless drone that matched the chant still echoing in his mind. A wet, guttural pulse from the tape, not human, not machine, but something that knew him, that whispered of the trench 20 miles offshore. Miguel's warning, "It's not a ship, it's a god," clawed at him, a hook in his gut, but Elias pushed it down, his hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, the van's engine sputtering as it climbed the coastal road toward Arecibo. His eyes burned from sleepless nights, his beard itched with sweat, and the weight of his past, MIT, his ruined career, Ellen's goodbye, pressed against him, but the trench's call was louder, a siren song drowning out doubt. Elias's destination was a library in Arecibo, a squat concrete building he'd scouted days ago, its archives rumored to hold declassified military reports, the kind that might confirm the stories he'd collected. Don Pepe's shredded nets and watching lights, Javier's singing disc, Miguel's God in the deep. The tape's chant had sparked visions, spirals, eyes, a presence that wasn't just alien but ancient, alive, and he needed data, not folklore, to anchor his hunt. The library was his last stop before tracking down Javier, the teenager whose sighting might tie the pieces together. Elias lit a Camel, the match's flare casting shadows across the van's cluttered interior. His reflection in the cracked rearview mirror was a stranger's, gaunt, gray-streaked, eyes too bright, too wild, a man chasing a truth that might destroy him. Arecibo's streets were quieter now, the pastel buildings, pink, turquoise, yellow, fading to gray in the twilight, their peeling paint ghostly under streetlights that buzzed like dying insects. Salsa music drifted from a few open windows, but the town felt subdued, as if it knew the sea's secrets and chose silence. Elias parked outside the library, its facade cracked, its sign reading Biblioteca Publica in chipped letters. The air was cooler here, carrying the salt tang of the Atlantic, a reminder of the trench's invisible weight, a chasm that haunted every story he'd chased. He grabbed the canvas bag and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and hunger. The library's double doors were heavy, their glass smudged, reflecting his silhouette, a lone figure, bag slung over his shoulder, cigarette ember glowing like a tiny star. Inside, the library was a tomb of dust and paper, its air stale, smelling of old books and the faint mildew that thrived in the tropics. Fluorescent lights flickered, casting a sickly glow over rows of shelves crammed with novels, histories, and yellowed newspapers. A lone librarian, a woman in her 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a tight bun, sat at a desk, stamping books with a rhythm that felt too loud in the silence. Elias approached, his boots scuffing the linoleum, and cleared his throat. "I'm looking for military records," he said, keeping his voice low, aware of how his gringo accent stood out. "Navy, maybe Coast Guard from the 50s. Anything about the sea off Arecibo, the trench." The librarian peered over her glasses, her expression a mix of boredom and suspicion. "You a reporter?" she asked, her accent thick, her fingers pausing on a stamp. "We don't got much, and what we got ain't for tourists." "No reporter," Elias said, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Researcher. Studying ocean anomalies." He hesitated, knowing how crazy he sounded, but pressed on. "Heard there were incidents, ships, sonar issues. Declassified stuff." She snorted, but pointed to a staircase in the corner, its steps sagging. "Basement, archive room. Navy stuff's in boxes, not sorted. You make a mess, you clean it." She turned back to her stamps, dismissing him, the thump of her work echoing as Elias headed downstairs. The basement was a labyrinth of cardboard boxes and metal cabinets, the air cooler but damp, smelling of mold and rust. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its light weak, casting shadows that seemed to shift when Elias wasn't looking. He set the bag with the tape on a table, its presence a pulse he could feel, and began searching, his fingers sifting through files labeled in faded ink. Hurricane reports, 1955, Coast Guard logs, 1960, fishery regulations. Dust coated his hands, his throat, but he kept going, driven by the chant in his head, by Miguel's haunted eyes, by the need to prove the trench was more than a story. After an hour, he found it, a box marked U.S. Navy classified, declassified 1972. Its lid warped, its contents a jumble of typed reports and handwritten notes. His heart raced as he pulled out a file labeled Operation Deep Echo, 1953 to 1957. The pages were brittle, some smudged, but legible, detailing Navy exercises off Puerto Rico, sonar tests in the trench. Elias sat on the floor, the concrete cold through his jeans, and read, his cigarette burning forgotten in his hand. The reports described anomalous contacts, objects moving at impossible speeds, depths no sub could reach, vanishing when pursued. One entry, dated June 1954, noted a sonar ping, so strong it damaged equipment on the USS Harrington, a destroyer. The crew reported a hum in the hull, a vibration that made men nauseous, some claiming they heard voices, not English, not anything human. The report's author, a Commander Walsh, recommended further study, but a handwritten note in red ink read, classified, cease investigation per ONI. Elias's breath hitched, the chant from the tape echoing louder now, a match to the hum Pepe had described, to Miguel's voices. He flipped to another report, October 1956, detailing the USS Calhoun, a destroyer that vanished during a routine patrol near the trench. The official log claimed a storm, but a surviving officer's statement, buried in an appendix, told a different story. A green light rising from the sea, a pulse in the air that stopped watches, a shape, disc-like, no markings, sinking into the trench before the ship lost contact. The officer, Lieutenant Reyes, was discharged, his file marked psychologically unfit. The Navy sealed the case, rerouting patrols to avoid the trench, a detail confirmed by a 1957 memo ordering no further sonar activity in the area without Pentagon approval. Elias scribbled notes, his pencil scratching, his hand shaking with a mix of triumph and dread. This was it, a cover-up, not just folklore but documented, suppressed, buried in a basement where no one would look. The trench wasn't just a chasm. It was a secret, guarded by men in suits who knew what Miguel knew, what Pepe saw, what Elias was chasing. He found another file, a 1955 ONI brief, mentioning unidentified submerged objects, USOs, detected in the Caribbean, their movements correlating with UFO sightings reported by civilian pilots. The brief speculated on non-terrestrial origins, but was stamped disavow, a word that burned in Elias's mind, proof of a truth too big to admit. He leaned back, the bulb above flickering, the shadows seeming to pulse in time with the tape's chant, though it sat silent in its bag. The reports were a map, pointing to the trench, to the Luz del Abismo, to the god Miguel feared. Elias's mind raced, connecting dots. The Navy's silence, the shredded nets, the singing lights, the tape's signal, all converging on a chasm that wasn't empty, wasn't natural. He imagined a machine down there, not metal but alive, its geometry wrong, its purpose unknowable, watching, waiting. The thought chilled him, but it also burned, a fire that had kept him alive since MIT, since Ellen, since he'd lost everything but this. The librarian's voice echoed down the stairs, sharp, announcing closing time. Elias stuffed the files back, keeping a few pages tucked in his notebook, their edges crinkling. He grabbed the bag, the tape's weight a reminder of Miguel's warning, and climbed the stairs, the basement's chill clinging to his skin. Outside, the night was black, the stars hidden by clouds, the seas crashed louder now, a summons he couldn't ignore. He drove to a motel, a cheap dive with flickering neon and roaches skittering across the floor, and spread the files on a sagging bed, his cigarette smoke curling like a ghost. The reports were proof, not of aliens but of something the Navy feared, something they'd buried. He added them to his notebook, cross-referencing with Pepe's story, Javier's sighting, the tape's chant, each piece a step closer to the trench. Elias lit another cigarette, the ember glowing, and stared at the motel's cracked ceiling, the chant in his head a lullaby and a curse. He was deeper now, past warnings, past reason, hooked on a truth that might not be a ship, might not be a machine, but something older, something that saw. The files were a lifeline, but they were also a noose, tying him to a cover-up that spanned decades, to a chasm that didn't just hold secrets but guarded them, alive and hungry. He exhaled, the smoke a question, and closed his eyes, the trenches whisper louder than ever. He smashed the cigarette into the ashtray, trying to stamp out the fog settling into his mind. His hands trembled as he lit another cigarette, the match's flare casting shadows that danced across the cracked ceiling, mimicking the spirals he'd sketched after hearing the tape, endless curves that matched its chant. Elias exhaled, the smoke curling like a ghost, his mind a storm of fragments. Miguel's haunted eyes, pleading to destroy the tape. Pepe's story of a green light that watched. The Navy's cover-up, burying truths about the trench in classified memos. The reports were proof, not of aliens, but of something. Something that moved too fast, too deep, something that hummed and sang and broke men like Miguel. Miguel's words, "It's not a ship, it's a god," clawed at him, a warning he wanted to ignore but couldn't shake. He stubbed out the cigarette in a chipped ashtray, the ember hissing, and leaned back, the bed's springs groaning. The motel's walls were thin, letting in the hum of a neighbor's radio, the muffled argument of a couple down the hall, the drip of a leaky faucet in the bathroom. But these sounds faded against the chant in his head, a pulse that matched his heartbeat, whispering of eyes in the deep, of spirals that swallowed light. He'd been awake for 36 hours, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, but his body was betraying him, his eyelids heavy, his thoughts blurring at the edges. He didn't want to sleep, didn't trust the darkness behind his eyes, not after Miguel's talk of nightmares, of eyes that never blinked. But the tape's rhythm was a lullaby, insidious, pulling him under despite his fight to stay awake. Elias's eyes closed, and the world dissolved into a sea of stars. Not the sky he'd studied at MIT, but a liquid void, black and endless, where stars didn't burn but pulsed, alive, their light green and sick, spiraling like the curves in his notebook. He was drowning, not in water but in something thicker, colder, a medium that pressed against his skin, filling his lungs with a weight that wasn't air. The chant was everywhere, not a sound but a vibration, a pulse that shook his bones, his teeth, his soul. He saw shapes in the deep, discs that weren't metal, their edges soft, organic, pulsing with veins that glowed, eyes too many, opening in the dark, their pupils spiraling inward, watching him with a hunger that wasn't human, wasn't animal, but something older, eternal. They knew his name, his fears, the secrets he'd buried, Ellen's tears, his students' laughter, the moment he'd chosen the signals over his life. The shapes moved closer, their forms shifting, not solid but fluid, a machine that wasn't a machine, a god that wasn't a god, birthing lights that sang, a chorus of drowned voices calling him to join them. He thrashed, or thought he did, his body weightless yet trapped, the sea of stars tightening around him, its cold seeping into his marrow. Salt coated his lips, sharp and real, a taste that didn't belong in a dream. He saw the trench, not as a map's contour but as a wound, a mouth in the ocean's floor, its edges pulsing, alive, exhaling the green light that Pepe had seen, that Javier had heard singing. The light spiraled upward, toward him, and he screamed, or tried to, but the sound was swallowed, his voice a bubble in the void. The eyes were closer now, their gaze a weight that crushed his chest, peeling back his thoughts to show him truths he wasn't ready for. A universe not empty but crowded, watched by things that didn't sleep, didn't die, just waited, their patience a predator's, their purpose unknowable. He was nothing to them, a speck, yet they saw him, wanted him, and the chant was their invitation, their command. Come to us, Elias. Come to the deep. He woke gasping, his body slick with sweat, the motel room's neon glow a harsh return to reality. His heart hammered, his throat raw, as if he'd been screaming. The bed was tangled, the sheets damp, and his lips burned with the taste of salt, real salt, like he'd swallowed the sea. He touched his mouth, his fingers trembling, and found grains of it, crystalline, impossible. The dream had been too vivid, too heavy, not a dream but a visitation, a glimpse of the trench's truth. He lurched upright, his boots hitting the floor, and checked the tape on the bedside table. It was still there, silent, its reels unmoving, yet the chant lingered in his head, louder now, a pulse that matched the salt on his lips, the spirals in his notebook. Then he heard it, a hiss, a pulse, not in his mind but in the room. The van's portable radio, left on the dresser, was emitting the tape's chant, the same wet guttural sound, the same heartbeat that wasn't a heartbeat. Elias froze, his breath shallow, his eyes locked on the radio. It was unplugged, its cord coiled on the floor, yet the sound poured out, filling the room, the walls seeming to vibrate, the neon outside flickering in time with the pulse. He stumbled to the dresser, his hands shaking as he grabbed the radio, its plastic warm, too warm, like it had been alive. He twisted the dials, slammed the power button, but the chant didn't stop, growing louder, the voices clearer now. Not words but intent, a summons that clawed at his mind. Elias, Elias, Elias. He yanked the battery compartment open, expecting to find batteries he didn't remember installing, but it was empty, the slots bare, the chant still pouring out, a violation of everything he'd learned in lecture halls, everything he'd believed as a scientist. He threw the radio against the wall, the plastic cracking, the sound cutting off with a final, guttural snarl that echoed in the silence. His chest heaved, his vision swimming, the room too small, the air too thick. Elias lit another cigarette, his hands shaking so badly the match took 3 tries to strike. The smoke curled, a ghost in the neon's glow, and he stared at the tape, its case seeming to pulse, though he knew it was still. Miguel's words rang in his head. Destroy it before it's too late. But he wouldn't. He stood, grabbing the tape, the notebook, the reports, shoving them into the canvas bag. The motel room felt like a trap, its walls closing in, the neon outside flickering like the green light in his dream. He needed air, needed to move, needed to find Javier, to hear the boy's story of singing lights, to add it to the mosaic that pointed to the trench. The radio lay broken on the floor, its silence louder than its chant, a reminder that the rules he'd lived by, science, reason, proof, were crumbling. He stepped outside, the night cool against his sweat-soaked skin, the seas crash a summons he couldn't ignore.